Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday. Sadly, we were not here last Wednesday because Zoom was down. Okay, that was weird. We had a guest scheduled, but Zoom all over was down. So we are happy to be here with Ricky again, and we have our very special guest, Danielle. Now, Danielle, how do you say your last name?
Rennie, as in, do you have
What's
indigestion tablets?
what's DRD?
My surname's double-barreled, Rennie-Davidson. Davidson's my married name, Rennie maiden. But as because my name's so long at work, they used to just say DRD.
Okay, because that's your Facebook name is Danielle
Yeah,
DRD. So I'm like, how do I
DRD.
pronounce that? Okay.
Yeah,
All
cuts
right.
down the followers.
Nice, nice. Popularity problems. Okay, so Danielle is here with us today. Now, Danielle, are you Jamaican or are you from the UK? What is your cultural background?
I am from the UK. I'm born and bred British. My dad is Jamaican. My mum is English. So I'm half Jamaican.
Okay, okay.
But I identify as black. Top joke.
Well, me too.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. That would be a whole different show. There's a woman who does that. We could have her on someday. Okay, she has your Neptune conjunction Sagittarius, though. That's a long story. Okay, but Danielle, tell us what is your sun, moon, and rising?
So I'm an Aries rising, and I've got a full moon, Sun in Scorpio, Moon Taurus,
All right, we got a Marshall
and my
on here,
Mars
Ricky.
is in Sag in the nine.
Are you scared of Danielle because she's double Mars?
Mars,
Uh,
Mars.
Me? No.
Yeah,
Mm-mm.
No.
no. Okay, Danielle, well, I'll let you take it away. You wanted to talk about the third and ninth house, but it sounds like you have some other things on your mind. So have at Ricky. There you go.
Um, no, well, I do enjoy the topic anyway. I've got a really strong chart that shows like culture and tradition is big for me. So when the topic of race came up, that was the first video I seen. I really enjoyed it. Um, and today I rewatched it, and Andrea asked you a question, Ricky, and she said, "Oh, if you think of natal charts and the Mars as a planet, would you say it shows up differently in white males to black males?" And you couldn't stop laughing, like because it was, of course, like it's going to show up differently. And it had me thinking about, do you personally think, for me, my Saturn and Mars are so prominent in my chart, but they're actually positive. When people look at my chart, they look for the negatives around. Don't get me wrong, they're malefic planets, so they're gonna play out as the natal promise for something to play out in that way. But in general, they are positive planets. And I wondered if you think that in other ethnic minorities, whether actually the malefics can be more of a positive and the benefics more of a malefic, actually, because of the way that we was raised younger, that the structure and kind of routine and discipline um, are so like fundamental. We don't necessarily get that Venusian kissy lovey hug kind of. What do you think? Does that make sense?
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So it makes me think of, so on one level, you can think of in an individual how the malefics and the benefics play out. But also you can think of it on a cultural level, how because in a culture, certain individuals are going to be the the malefic experiences are going to be projected onto them, and the benefic experiences are going to be projected onto certain people. And so, it's like in America, if and generally speaking, right, in the American image of beauty,
Yeah.
you know, it tends to be Caucasian, right? Initially, it's changing, definitely
Yeah.
changing. But that's the, and then if you think of the ugliest person, right, it tends to be a minority, right? So it's like the projection of who embodies the benefic energies and the malefic energies.
Mm.
So if I'm saying that the malefics tend to be projected onto minorities, So because it's projected onto them, they have more consciousness, they have more experience. They can identify with it more, and therefore they are better able to make a strong response. So I think of in America, African Americans, like one of our cultural values is the ability to deal with adversity because so much of the malefic experiences and culture have been projected on us, like slavery, right? We just had more, we had more practice on turning negative things into positive things. And less practice appreciating the good things because we never know
Yeah.
when they're going to get taken away from us.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think you're right. I think you're onto something.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and I was watching another video. You've just done a talk, and you was talking about your natal placement, the moon square Mars.
Mhm.
And you were saying, like it's hard. You have to speak to someone to really understand the aspect, because for you, when someone looks at that and they have these ideas in their head, but for you, how it plays out is going to be different because of the upbringing your mom had, their descendants had, that impacted them. How she then structured and spoke to you is, you know what I mean? How that obviously would have been around your health as well, and would have had a malefic point at some stage to do with maternal or mom, or might have um, played out at some point. But I think a lot of it is that upbringing, and people don't realize um, the difference. I was just saying to Andrea, even if you think of like marriages, arranged marriages. If you looked at someone's chart, say if we looked at Andrea's, and there was no um like ethnic background to you, and you had something that pointed out to eloping, like sudden marriages and several marriages. But if you're a Muslim and arranged marriages within your culture and upbringing, it's not going to show up.
Yeah,
It's not
exactly.
going to show up like that. Yeah, it's a sudden marriage of someone you don't know.
Yeah. Or even certain cultures where, African cultures where it's customary to have multiple wives. Right, it's still marriage, but when we look at the seventh house, we're looking at it's going to manifest very differently. But I think the first question you asked is, it, I sense it's at the core of a lot of the conversations that Andy and I have been having about diversity in astrology because of the history of astrology. Typically, minorities were never doing this; they never had access to it. So, because the minorities or the people that were the malefic people or got that projection, um, never really got to have their opinions or their perspectives appreciated in astrology. So it skews even the language about the way we think about a benefic and a malefic. Even that, right? When you start talking to minorities who have carried the burden of those energies, they have a different perspective and a different attitude. And I think as our opinion and perspective is taken more into consideration, it's going to change. It's going to change astrology dynamically because you can't talk about, and that's what I find when I'm talking to someone who's more conventionally astrologically trained, and they have a certain perspective about malefics. It just doesn't ring true for me.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what you're pointing out.
Exactly. It's so hard to see someone's like real, like that cultural difference. Even Andrea was also on about like even body types and things like that. There's so much that needs um investing into astrology when it comes to race, and people find it uncomfortable, but they don't find speaking about people's sexual orientation uncomfortable. Do you know, race is not an uncomfortable topic. Do you know, racism isn't, and it does need like someone to really get into like the details of them differences that show up, because it's relevant and should be relevant to the people that are like out there with mass people following them who are projecting their opinions onto natal charts, whereas you couldn't really read someone genuinely, like of like a cultural chart. You'd probably get it wrong
Yeah.
because you wouldn't be taking into consideration a lot of factors. Sorry,
Yeah.
Andrea.
Yeah.
Oh no,
You
I
will
just
get it
want to
wrong. You will get it wrong. It's not probably, you will get it wrong.
speak for yourself. Anyway, no, I just want to bring back to a point that you guys are making that's I want to really make sure people are getting that is really poignant. Okay, so if the culture says that plural marriages are the norm, right? You know, we can't look into the chart and say, oh, you have multiple marriages because you have Uranus in the seventh house, because in that culture, that would be a traditional structure, right? Like that would be, is that kind of what you guys are saying that like, whereas like in American culture currently, like we look for monogamous marriage. So if you have Uranus in the seventh house, you know, square Mars, maybe you have
Yeah.
multiple partners, and that's kind of revolutionary. But in some cultures, it wouldn't be considered revolutionary to have multiple marriages, right? It would be considered traditional. So maybe
I
that
don't even think it'd show up in their seventh. I think you might look at someone's chart and see a placement, a transit hits it, activates it, and they elope because I don't know, they've got a Neptune, Uranus hitting the ruler of whatever is in the seventh or something. This like delusion, love paradise just taking off and suddenly doing something under the illusion it's going to work out. Whereas if I was Muslim and my parents sorting out my marriage, I don't know if you would look in the seventh and see that because um, there's nothing like sudden action I'm taking. It's a fact I'm growing, knowing that that's going to happen. So it's more likely to be seen in um, like your heritage, maybe what's coming from either the third, the fourth, the ninth,
that's such a
or
good point that your planet in the seventh house is you acting out your chi on marriage to the world, right? Like it's like my chakras are open to getting married. Like, but if your parents are the actors in your marriage, then your seventh house doesn't really matter.
no, no,
Well,
it might
I
go.
disagree. I disagree. And we'd have to look at charts to see. I
Yeah,
think
that's
we would
true.
see a connection between the parental houses. We'd probably see an aspect between the ruler of the seventh and the ruler of the parental houses for it to even have an effect on us. So
Yeah,
I think there's another example that comes to mind that is rooted in reality, in a real experience in America of in the South, in certain very strongly religious cultures, okay,
yeah,
that there would be women's groups and the married women would meet once a week and they would pray. And the main prayer and the main purpose of the group was how do we keep our families together when our husbands are trying to sleep with everything that moves? You know? So in other cultures, right, if that was the agreed upon reality, they'd be like, well, why are you with them? Right? That the angle of the support would be, let me help you get out of the relationship. Whereas in a different culture, the angle is how do we support you to have
support
the
it.
patience to allow this person to mature. So right, because it's a different culture and a different
Yeah,
attitude about relationships. So someone who
it's
has
more
something
interesting.
gnarly
Yeah, yeah,
Like Pluto Mars or Pluto Saturn and Scorpio, in the fifth or the seventh. And so it's really, this kind of experience is really intense for them. But their response to it is to rally around and to find support to help work through it. Where other cultures, it's like, okay, how do we liberate you from this?
Okay, I have to speak to this. Um, Danielle, I don't want to take up too much space in your episode here, but I want to say that there's
no,
a
no,
couples container, there's a thing like, so they say that a couple staying together is actually dependent on what the container around that couple, and if they have problems, does the container push them back together or does the container push them apart? And that's really pointing what you're saying is like in cultures where plural marriage is the norm, if there's a problem with the chart or anything, push you
Mm.
back together into your plural marriage container. And in other cultures, it gets exploded out. You know, that's a beautiful example of the chart layer interacting with the cultural layer.
Yeah, yeah. No, I definitely I do definitely think there's a lot to be said about the influences that come in across like the third and ninth axis and like what you get from the fourth, really, like your heritage. Um, and I think Ricky was saying, I can't remember what the actual question was that he was talking about on the one of your episodes, but Saturn in particular, um, you were saying to look at someone from like an ethnic background, more than likely it's going to really, elders are going to really stand out because it's that fun. Family was a really big thing because if you could back from slavery, if you couldn't read or write, you weren't allowed to do those things, and you weren't allowed to progress. You prayed, you ate together, you sang together, you found spiritual things and religion and church and the Bible. And that's why you don't really find a lot of black people from the older generations that are in astrology because Christianity really became a huge thing. And in the Bible, spiritual things like tarot was deemed bad. So to like be astrology or something would be worshipping a false god or something seen as, even though it's not, you're not worshipping a god, it's the actual planets and system. So you wouldn't have been encouraged, or it wouldn't have been anything you've seen, the majority anyway. So you would have been brought up with your grandparents kind of passing down cooking recipes and going to church and either taking you to church or you're going to Sunday school or you're just hearing them speak about that and families coming together and the safety in the house, big pots of rice and chicken and that sharing, that is like what supported you and surrounded you. And Saturn becomes an infrastructure that's, I think, really important for people from who are really ninth house people and ethnic minorities. I think look to their side.
Yeah, I was going to ask you why you picked the ninth house as far as culture, and then I thought I could ask us all, how does the ninth house influence our culture? And you're partially saying it's the religion of our culture, right? Do we have any other thoughts on how ninth house influences our culture?
Ricky, do you want to take it?
Yeah, yeah. So I think ninth house is very much tied to culture. Is is that we can have a certain upbringing, and I think this is part of the angular houses, is that because they're on the angles, I think they affect everything else in the chart. And so I think we can have an upbringing, but what part of that upbringing, what part of that ethnicity carries over into our belief systems? Because that's when they become most powerful. And it's easy for me to say this because I have Sagittarius on the cusp of my fourth house, and my Jupiter is in the ninth house conjunct my sun. So I grew up in a very religious family. So for me, it's hard to separate family, home from religion. But I imagine in everybody, right, is in our upbringing, there's certain belief systems, whether it comes through religion or not, that stick with us. And
Yeah,
our first access to those belief systems are the fourth house.
yeah. And what you discuss is the third house. So your general like topics and learning and like what influences your kind of learning techniques and things like that, I think come from the third, and then your higher learning and your actual fundamental beliefs um sit in the ninth, like them two
Hmm. Hmm.
converse on a like the ninth's more solid, you know, for me. But again, that's why I was like, I like the joys, like the sun. Um, being in its joy in the ninth and the moon in the third, because I think it's more like that early emotional nurturing discussions, like the third, like you're talking it out. But when you actually believe something and that's what you're following, um, and you're going to practice it and put it into, I think, sits in the ninth. Um, yeah,
So,
that's personal.
yeah, one connection that I make naturally between the fourth and the ninth is the ninth house journeys overseas, right? It's the epitome of leaving home.
Yeah,
You know? And the third house, the things we hear in the household, right? And I always say third house and ninth house is I grew up in San Diego, and there's a certain way that people talk in San Diego. There's a certain way that people think, right? And on the West Coast, and so growing up there, the assumption was everyone thinks like this, everyone talks like this, and it has to be an assumption because that's all that I hear. But I took my first trip to New York, and I recognized, they talk differently here. They speak differently here. They think differently here.
yeah,
But there are
yeah,
certain things that were the same in San Diego that were the same in New York. And then I spent some time in Texas, and then I spent some time in Florida. And then I went overseas. I started experiencing really different cultures. And I noticed that in all the different places, there were ways that people thought differently, people spoke differently, but there are also certain universals that I found each place that I went. And so for me, the third house are all the differences, the changes, because the third house for me is the process of finding one's voice, and not the place we grow up and the words that we hear are not always the perfect words that allow us to express what's inside of us. Sometimes we have to go different places, hear different ways of thinking, and say, that makes so much more sense than the way that my mom or my sister or my grandma said it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and so this finding our voice is like I think of this thing where you hear something, maybe it's a quote or a phrase, or you read something in a book and it just jumps out at you. It just sticks with you. To me, that's a third house experience. But as we wrestle with why does this jump out to me, it helps us gain a deeper appreciation for our larger philosophy and our larger worldview. And it at first, the moment where the information comes up, that's the third house. When it settles or it finds its way and to expand our larger philosophy of the world, then I think it transforms into the ninth house. And so I think the third house is just sharing whatever we've been thinking about in the third house. And then the ninth house is after we've processed and assimilated whatever we've been thinking about, it's turned into something that we know, that we believe, and then we share it as an opinion or a belief.
yeah. I also was thinking, I know like the third house, depending what motion you're moving in, like goes to the second, but um in the triad it's your third falls into your fourth, and obviously you carry it on to your fifth. So like to me, what you're learning, you're discussing in the third, it's that connection with the fourth and your heritage, that early years, and then you pass it on to like your children. But then, like the myths or like the sayings, like my nana said, if you don't hear, you must feel.
Yeah.
Like they're dropping down from the ninth into the, like the third, them like strong like sayings that are going to carry forward. Because do you think the grandparents sit in the ninth,
Hmm.
other than as actual planet like your elders are Saturn? I know you hit your roots and like are the fourth, but do you ever
I don't
where
know if
would
the
you put
grandparents had.
grandparents?
I don't know. I have no idea. I'd have to look at the Book of Rulers. No, I don't know.
Yeah. So for me, for me, I feel like the grandparents still fall in the fourth and the 10th.
Yeah,
I don't know. I just think there's like a unbroken string, that we're
Yeah.
part of. And I feel
Yeah, like
like
I
it's
feel like four is like the ancestral line.
yeah, the ancestral line, but because your beliefs and the real strong things that come down that you really take in come from they normally come from an elder belief, like a guru, and your gurus might be your grandma, you know,
Yeah.
that first early knowledge that dropped down into the third, went to
Mhm.
the fourth, and you'll say to your children, you know, if you don't hear, you must feel, you know, that kind of,
Yeah.
you know, it'll pass on. You take out the stuff that you're gonna believe in the ninth. They're the things, you know, the
All
recipes.
the grandma memes.
The
Yeah,
grandma
the
memes.
grandma thing. Someone only was left,
The
you
contagious
know.
thought forms that come down from your grandma. Those are nine.
Yeah, if it was up to my grandma, I'd be at church every Sunday, but you know, this is my church.
Mm.
But yeah, uh,
Interesting.
I do think that I do look at the nine, and I also, the other thing I was thinking about was, I know because you know, quite a Mercury person, and you were saying about Mercury and the moon and health and body and things. Do you find that within people of ethnic minorities and culture that their Mercury can be misinterpreted because you tend to have a lot of medical things that come with being like African Caribbeans, or you know, you have high blood pressure, which can lead to dementia and Alzheimer's, and them things seem to be prominent, you know, like prostate cancer is really high in black males, and they don't tend to go and get their prostates checked. Um, like them medical things, but um, yeah, for a lot of things, I think when people look, they don't take health factors into consideration
Hmm.
of the cultural impact it's having on your chart from members of the family. They'll look at it differently. What do you think?
Hmm. So when I think of health concerns, especially in this context, I think of the first house. First house, the body. And in general, I think of the first house and the sixth house. Because sixth house is health concerns in general, but when it's sixth house is activated and the first house are activated, it's health concerns that relate to one's body.
Yeah.
Right. From my background in alternative medicine, um, I could play with the idea of the moon and Mercury. I can also throw the sun in there. But to keep it simple, for me, the moon is about how we nurture ourselves. And in Ayurveda, they say that there's two things they say in Ayurveda. One is that all disease starts in the digestive system. You know? So it points to the importance of nurturing, right? About what we take in and relative to our body's ability to assimilate and digest it. Okay?
Which is
And then
cultural, like what you eat is cultural.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
So
exactly.
the
Yeah, and that's
yeah, so I think part of it is the moon is like what we're taking in and our ability to assimilate it, but also I think of Mercury as our ability to assimilate stuff, to break it down, to appreciate, to understand it, and to digest it. And also in a similar vein, I think of the moon as like our subjective or unconscious mind, and Mercury as our objective or conscious mind. No. And so based on this, if we don't know who we are, meaning we don't know what's good for us and we're not confident and clear on the way we see the world, we're going to have difficulty assimilating and adjusting to life. And I think when you are a minority in the usual assumptions that people make don't really include you, if you don't have some firm grounding in where you come from, it's going to be easy to be attracted to taking on in things and trying to process them in ways that you don't have the ability to do it.
yeah,
So and I think this also applies to certain foods. It's like I find that Caucasian white people typically do well processing alcohol, whereas African Americans, their bodies don't do so well processing alcohol.
yeah,
But if you're in a situation where everyone drinks and you're trying to fit in with those people and you're not taking into consideration, is this really good for me? Then you're going to find yourself in trouble.
yeah,
And I think of, African Americans, where we come from, it's a different mindset and a different approach to the way we think about life and the origin and the creation and the purpose of life. But we're in a different land where they have a really powerful perspective that's very different from ours. And a lot of times it was coerced upon us. then I think you find yourself in a difficult situation. So when I see a lot of the diseases that show up on ethnic lines, I think it's more of maladaptation to a completely different culture.
Yeah, I did. I was thinking about it, and I did find it quite interesting, especially with my own chart, when people assume certain things when they look at it because it looks a certain way, but it's like my grandparents lived till 96, even though my granddad had kidney failure and was on dialysis. My grandma had Alzheimer's for years. I mean, they say you don't, after being diagnosed, I think like you live 7 years. Gosh, I can't remember my nanan without Alzheimer's, and I'm 44. That's how
Yeah.
long. And her Alzheimer's went into dementia, and she lived into. I mean, she only died 2024, so 2023, sorry, Christmas. So I mean, she was like 96.
Well, it makes me
They
think of
both lived.
one of the ways that ninth house can influence health and culturally speaking is am I using the word right? Diaspora? What is it? Is that when cultures flee
Mm.
to other? Maybe I'm not using that right, but
Not so much ninth house influence, it was the moon Mercury, as
oh,
health
well, but
in the
if let's say
planet. Yeah.
you travel to a different area or a different culture, that would be a ninth house action is to like travel. And then you're not as adapted to that culture's food or sunlight. It makes me think of this episode I saw of this very white Caucasian woman who moved and married this African man in an African culture, and she couldn't be out in the sun, and everyone there would just walk around in the sun because they had really dark skin, and she was burning and she was dying. I mean, like in the
Yeah,
sun, and
yeah,
like but she was in love with this man, so she stayed there. But I think that affected her health, right? Is that
yeah,
night house travel to this other land and
yeah,
culture and the food they ate and all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Interesting. Just because that's one way where someone probably has some discord relative to the ninth house. But in other situations, people will travel to other climates far away because maybe they have asthma and that the climate far away or the environment far away is just healthier for them. I imagine a woman who grows up in the South, a Caucasian attractive woman that grows up in the South, and the expectation is for her to be a debutante, but she's Aries rising with Mars conjunct the ascendant and a Scorpio moon, you know, um, and and so for her, if she had traveled to Spain or traveled to a Latin culture where women were more allowed to express passion, that she would be much healthier in that other environment than the one that she was born into.
yeah, yeah.
Snaps on that. That is so the interlay of a chart and culture. Like, but what if someone has a sixth, ninth square? Whoa. Like
I mean,
Mars in the sixth square, Saturn in the ninth, and then you could have some travel
I have
health
six.
problems.
Mine's all 6 9.
Yeah.
Really?
Well,
I've got a bucket. I've got a bucket. So it's like the moon and then 6 7 8 9. That's it. Them with the moon.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say like an example of 6 9 is there certain cultures that do that 6 9. It doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter what planets are there. Because they do 6 9 so well. They have a way to turn it into harmony. I think for instance a culture like India, where in India everyone has a guru. So this idea of going through some kind of intense training that expands your horizons and makes you more skillful, it's built into the culture. So even if you have Saturn Pluto, there's a guru for that, right? Meaning there's a teacher that can help you make peace with that. But other cultures, I find like in America, especially white people, is like they don't like mentors. It like it's like an anti like apprenticeship society, right? It's like some issue of we can do it ourselves. We don't need help.
Yeah, that is
Underneath,
so
people that are
white. That
true,
is so white. To just be like, yeah, I know better. Blah, blah, blah.
yeah. But underneath, even if you look at the most successful people in the right, they all had mentors, but the general overlay is all right. I can learn it myself. I can learn it on YouTube. I don't need anyone's help.
So how does religion play into culture? I know you guys mentioned, the church that you guys grew up in, but I think And now you're talking about gurus in India. It's like, so let's just solidify that concept and say, how much does religion play into culture and then thusly the chart that's growing up in that culture?
And so again, I think it depends on the culture. We were talking earlier about in our culture, there's such, because of being in America as slaves, there is such a strong connection between church and family. So in certain cultures, there's going to, like, kind of in India, when I talked about the sixth, ninth house connection, I think in certain cultures, there's going to be certain houses that just go together in that culture. So anyone born in that culture, there's just an assumption that these two things go together, whether it fits into your chart or not, it becomes a pattern that your chart is manifesting through. So
Yeah.
I think it depends on the culture, how important religion is in that culture.
Yeah, and more than likely, like I think I know this is you might think this sounds silly, but sometimes I like to look at and think if we just think modern astrology, it's probably easier for me because I'm an Aries rising, but an Aries rising chart, and I always find it curious, like why Jupiter's exalted in the fourth, like the planet of, like faith and belief systems and, like teachers and like it, it's a home in the fourth where foreign, like if its home is the ninth house of foreign people, found solace at home. Just how like Mercury is exalted in the sixth, of like slaves and servitude, but in detriment in the ninth, like you couldn't read or write, but you could work for us. Mars exalted in the 10th, you can have a scholarship, athlete, run. You can run for us. Do you know, like
Are you
I
talking about
find
the
it.
Hellenistic joys?
Well, that's just like mo modern astrology, just as an air like modern astrology use Aries rising, don't they? They don't. They'll just use the Aries rising and Leo. But fifth is everything, not the actual sun. So obviously we use Hellenistic, but I like to look at um the modern astrology chart and kind of think about where things naturally. I know by the Theomundi, Jupiter is in its joy in the 11th and the moon in the third, but um, by exaltation and stuff, where planets in the modern astrology chart find their joys. And I just find it curious that Mercury is detriment in the ninth house of foreign people as the planet of reading and writing. But it exalts in the sixth house of slaves and servitude. Um, and Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, um, the ninth and the 12th, have kind of like hiding knowledge, rooted in the exalts in the fourth house of home. Uh, I just think it's interesting to look at as just like I think it's interesting to reverse the joys, like if you've got sun in the ninth, how would it feel to have it in the third and the moon in the, like for a person who's got it in the joy in the third, in the ninth, it's, that opposite effect. I like to play with.
I find it so amazing to see you talking about Hellenistic astrology because, like, I feel like that's such a white culture. Like, Hellenistic astrology, like,
Do you
am
think?
I
See, I don't
wrong?
see it as white or black. I just think tradition. I love tradition. It's traditional
Okay.
astrology. Um,
Yeah, I'm not saying it should be. I just feel like it's just a bunch of white dudes in charge of Hellenistic astrology.
But
Sorry if
I
I
mean, for
offended
me, I
you,
love
Ricky. Don't
astrology,
be
and I don't
mad at
really see any
me.
black
What?
people anywhere. So, but I think you're always going to be off the back foot if you're trying to find somebody. For Ricky, I don't know. For you're in America, so it might be easy for you. I have no one in the UK, and definitely if I was to look, I might struggle to find a black person. Um, and that's just not in astrology. I mean, Andrew, I've spoken to you just about like work in general, like. Um, I come from retail and management, and I never had anyone above me who was black. Like when like you're supposed to be inspired by what you see. If you're not seeing people doing it, and I think people find it odd to relate to people from different ethnic minorities because of the cultural difference, either finding as aggressive or the language is different or the way that we phrase ourselves or the passion we have. Um, we've had to grow it differently, and then we have to adapt ourselves to these like circumstances around to make other people comfortable. It's like it's difficult. I feel like you're climbing an hill all the time.
And I think the culture of astrology transcends race. And I think, Ricky's made that point on this show that it's like we're beyond race. We're like into just otherness and all these things. And it's like,
Yeah.
um, you know, and though I do want to ask you, Danielle, what is the culture of astrology like in the UK? Like, and how is that different than American astrology
Um,
or similar?
I've no idea. It doesn't exist to me. So there's not like nowhere. So I've like Googled to see if like there's somewhere like I could go. Like there's probably like CAF somewhere and someone doing talks, or you could find somewhere near. For me, there is no one in my family. There is no one in my friends. There is no community around. There's like tarot or mediums or like shops I could go to, crystals or that kind of thing. But like an astrologer for me, it's solidly online. And um, America, there is a few UK people that I've met while doing online courses, but they're right down south. Um, and
Hmm.
I live up north. I'm up here and they're down there, so it's not. Um, Yeah, it's
Wow.
not easy. It's
Because
not
you're a
something
very,
you
very good astrologer. I mean, I can't believe how far you've come just online and kind of flying solo over there.
Yeah, and I only found astrology in 2019 and
Wow.
bumbled my way through it for the first 10 months. Um, but I'm a quick learner, so um,
Yeah. So then do you consider culture when you're doing a chart reading or you're reading charts for somebody, do you consider the cultural background of the person you're reading the chart for?
no, I don't do natal readings. So I love like mystery charts and I'll jump online, but I don't. I'll talk to people about their charts, and I prefer teaching people like the basic grounding rules of astrology, and how to know yourself rather than someone just, coming to me and more than wanting to know who they are, just wanting to know what's coming, do you know? And because you have to me, you've got to know someone and talk to them and see how it's worked out, see what's, because someone might be having a transit, like the Venus is, going through the fifth or the seventh, and am I going to find love? And you'd be like, yeah, but if you're not coming out of your house or you're not online dating or you're not even but then they're secretly and they're not telling you they're an artist, you know what I mean? You know, it's I just think you've kind of got to speak to people and um so I like to just look up like charts of famous people and historic people like Rosa Parks or Mary Angelou, um like really influential Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and look at their charts, or like Adolf Hitler, as to why. Like, can you see racism in a chart? That's what I want to know. Can you look at a chart and see racism?
Ricky, what do
Um,
you think?
I don't think you can see anything without the cultural context.
Oh,
you don't think, Sarah?
I don't, because to me, what the chart shows is the raw material. You don't know what's happened to that raw material until you have some sense of what this person has been through.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
I would
don't think
disagree
you
a
can
little bit.
see it.
Well, here's an example. Okay, let's just use Mars as an example. Someone has a strong Mars. Okay, all you know is they have that Mars is prominent in their chart. Okay, you know that whatever Mars things that are in their early environment are going to jump out to the person, and they're going to have meaningful interactions with those things. But you don't know what those Mars things are. You don't know, was their dad a football coach? Was their mom like anti-anger? You don't know. But you do know that whatever Mars things were in that early environment are going to be the most powerful shaping influence on the person.
Well, okay, I agree with you, and I just want to build on what you're saying. So I feel like it's like a tapestry woven of what is the culture this chart's growing up in, and then what is the chart like. So, for example, let's say we take two charts, and they're both growing up in the same inner city, or no, let's say it's a white suburban trailer park or whatever, and one of them, and they're both Caucasian people, and one of them has Mars in Taurus in the 11th house, square Saturn in the ninth house, or something like that. That person's more inclined towards racism or racist ideologies because of their Mars in 11th square the ninth, where they're dealing with ideology of groups.
And
And
tradition
whereas
that,
if the other person has, Venus in the 11th trine Jupiter, they're going to be really nice in the group. So I do think if you know the culture they're growing in and then you know the chart, you can kind of predict if they have a racist inclination or not.
yeah, I was thinking, because whose chart was it? Um, yeah, I was looking at Adolf Hitler's chart, and I was thinking about like the would you look to kind of the ruler of the ninth as like foreign land, foreign peoples, to see whether the connection between the ruler and maybe like Saturn as a traditional planet, uh, kind of that elders, regardless of culture, like that kind of belief system passed down that might have not been Jupiterian, whether there was a Saturn Jupiter square or Saturn something restrictive or Saturn in there making an odd aspect in like a bad sign with an odd aspect or something that stood out like this person's um belief systems a lot in, you know.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think you can. I don't think you can say that. I don't think you can say that. So,
No, I don't mean it's a fact. It was something I was thinking about and I'm just like,
oh,
yeah,
perfect.
yeah,
Makes
I
yeah,
don't,
yeah,
yeah, I'm
I
not
want to
putting
hear
it out
I
there
want
as
to
a
hear the
thing.
disagreement.
Yeah, it was a thought like so. Yeah, I'm wondering and I'm looking at it to
yeah,
see.
yeah. It
Um,
makes sense. It makes sense. That's I
yeah,
think that's healthy. It's very healthy thinking and wondering. Because then we can see where the holes in our processes are. Because to me, right, so much of astrology is dogma, and it comes back to what we were saying before. It's not even dogma from our people. So I think there has to be an underlying question. That's why for me, when I do astrology, I'm trying to get underneath the dogma. I'm trying to get to the core principles and decide for myself how they interact with each other. Because to me, if you take a minority, someone in a difficult situation, and you give them all easy aspects, they ain't gonna make it.
yeah,
Right? They're not going to be able to make it as soon as adversity comes, and we all know it's going to come. Right? They're gonna. It's not
yeah,
going to work. That's why to me, you have to take the chart, and you have to have is deep and complex understanding of the environment that chart is manifesting in to be able to say anything definitively. And you can call it culture, or you can call it more generally the environment, because again, my whole thing is when we're babies and the birth chart does not describe an adult, it describes us when we were born. As soon as we are born, whatever is in the environment starts interacting with our chart, and it starts to build us, it starts to create us in
yeah,
hard aspects or whatever. It depends on how our parents deal with those hard aspects. If our parents are really masterful and skillful with adversity, what's going to show up in that child is not going to be the same with parents that were horrible at dealing with adversity. Right? It'll be the same chart, but it'll be completely two different people.
yeah. No, no, I agree. But I was curious. I was thinking about it today, coming on here, and the discussion about race, and I thought, I wonder if you could see racism in a chart, whether it stands out as, like someone's belief system, like they're just, or maybe they just don't have no belief, like they don't believe in God, or they don't. I don't know. I was curious anyway, so I was curious to see what you thought about it.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
really good
So
chart, and I'm gonna say touche on that one, Ricky.
I'll say like a powerful Saturn. I'll say a powerful Saturn would be the first thing that I'd look for. Because the
Yeah,
nature
yeah,
of Saturn is like fear. And if we think of the root of racism, it's fear. I think it's fear of the other. So the place I would start is I'd look for what's going on. Is the Saturn strong? And is it connected to relational symbolism? Because
yeah.
then we know that the powerful Saturn has the ability to manifest in relations and in other people.
See, you thought about what I just said, and then look, see, you, you fed it back out through, see, because it might not like show racism, but it might show um restriction around them, like cultural things or beliefs, even just show an atheist, or like someone who just,
Well,
if you don't speak English, I don't want to listen to you kind of thing.
I do think how a person's built affects every single interaction they have in life. So if your chart goes off at the mouth, if you have a Mercury Mars conjunction and you can't stop swearing and saying shit, like you're gonna get in some racist fights because you just said something to the guy behind you at the grocery store that was kind of iffy and they happen to be an African man and like then there's like a racist struggle. Like I feel like charts that are more palatable, like a Mercury Venus chart conjunct would have less racist interactions than just a Mercury Mars.
I agree, but interactions and racism are not the same.
Yeah.
Right? And I think even the soft ones might be the most racist people because it doesn't ever right. They don't allow it to come out of their conscious mind, so it just stays
Yeah.
in buried and works from the unconscious. But I think when we say that Saturn is the greater malefic, we can say that most of the things that we're not proud of comes from not healthy Saturn, but comes from unhealthy Saturn. Because right, like all the planets can have good days, all the planets can have bad days, right? But the Saturn bad days, woo, right, and Mars bad days, those are the ones that leave a mark. So, and also I think Pluto, because Pluto to me is the planet of cooperation. Pluto is the part of us that can see that is colorblind, you know, and but also Pluto is a part of us that can be overly attached to color. So Pluto to me is cooperation or what we call um, um, this idea where it's us against them, right? Because cooperation, when we get it right, is we're all on the same team. But when cooperation goes astray, it's our team against your team. And I think that's the deepest form of racism. And I think that's what comes up when I think of Hitler's chart is the Pluto. So I'd say Pluto, Saturn, and then the third culprit for me is Venus. Because Venus does rule love, what we like, what feels good to us, but Venus also rules disgust. You know? And if we're trained from an early age that a certain color or a certain way of talking or a certain smell is disgusting, okay, that locks into our Venus. That locks into our Venus and it makes it difficult for us to appreciate. My favorite word for Venus is appreciation. So that we can see the beauty or we can see the harmony in something. But if we have some kind of Venus twist, it makes it very difficult for us to appreciate or see the beauty in something foreign.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, and I do think that woman who does identify as African American, even though she's white. I don't know if you know. I don't remember her name, but she has a Moon Neptune conjunction in Sagittarius, and it's like that chart is like culturally filling. Like it's like idealizing multiculturalism, like to the point where she like kind of like is delusional about multiculturalism, or like wants to like trip on it philosophically. I feel like is what her chart's doing, and it's like that's a whole different kind of interaction with race and culture that's just kind of weird. You know what I mean? I mean, I feel
Yeah.
I think it's a really good question you asked, Danielle, and we could trip on this
Mm.
for episodes of just like how does the chart layer inform a person's interaction with the concept of racism or race at all or culture at all. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, just culture and tradition and how that's seen against, your average white person to someone who's comes from whether that be Chinese or, because everything's different from the religion you're brought up with, whether it's just a simple, Christianity or it's something solid like Muslim and arranged marriages, the food, the health, the the myths around black guys having big, you know,
Hey, it's not a
like
myth. No, I'm
when's
just kidding.
the last time you got
not
I'm
your
just kidding.
prostate
I'm
checked?
just
Yeah.
kidding.
Ricky wants you to solidly believe.
It's true. What do you mean?
Oh my
It's not
God.
true.
Jeez. Well, Danielle,
It's
you've been
not
a
true.
wonderful guest. Like, what a joy. What you brought up so many good questions. I feel like you have something else to say, Ricky.
Well, just one thing, and I'm trying to say this in a compassionate way, but I'll ask it as a question. Do you guys find that it's the same response if someone says, "I feel like I was born a different gender," and they ask to be identified as that other gender, or if someone says, "I feel like I was born a different race, please identify me as that different race."
Oh my God, let's have an episode on that because I have a lot to say about that lady and that whole situation. Can we do an episode on that, Ricky?
Yeah, please.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I'd love to. Yeah.
All right, you guys. Well, this has been an excellent episode. Ricky, I missed you last week. I was like, well, where is my friend Ricky? And that was upsetting. Danielle,
I've
thank you
loved it. You got to
for
get me
anytime.
back. I love
Yeah,
it.
thank you, Danielle. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
No problem.
All right. Bye, everyone.
All right,
Bye-bye.
bye. Take care. Bye bye.